I think I can speak for most basketball players when I say you want to be the go-to guy in the fourth quarter. You want so badly to be that guy that's taking the shot, hits the game winner, gets the recognition, is the guy who everyone's talking about at school the next day. You want that really badly, but maybe you're not quite in that situation. So what I want to do today is give you some really easy tips on how to use nutrition to increase your chances of that happening. Because most people don't realize just how much nutrition can impact late game physical and mental performance, both of which is extremely important in being clutch. Because it doesn't matter how clutch you are, if your legs are dead or if you can't really think straight because you're gassed, it doesn't really matter that much. You might be able to power through it here and there, but consistently being that consistent night in, night out go-to scorer late in the fourth quarter and overtime is not going to happen if you're constantly exhausted in that situation. So the first of the three things we're going to talk about today is just the overall importance of being properly fueled. This encompasses your total daily calorie intake. Are you eating enough food? Are you in a deficit or in a surplus or at maintenance? Where is that at? Are you eating enough protein, carbs, fats? What is your macronutrient intake at? What does your pregame meal look like? You should have that pregame meal dialed in. By the way, I have a video on that. Check it out on the channel. But long story short, the first thing you need to consider is making sure you're overall fueled properly going into the game, because that's going to help you early on, but also later in games when guys are starting to get more gassed. Everyone's hands are on their knees. You're going to be able to outlast them. And if you're able to do that and be in better physical shape later in games, your legs aren't going to be as dead, so your shot's not going to be short. Mentally, you're going to be able to think better because the food you eat actually fuels your brain and your nervous system as well, not just your muscles. And you're going to be in an overall better spot to perform better late games. So like I said, overall calorie intake, at least be at maintenance on game day. You do not want to be in a deficit. Maybe in a slight surplus, depending on how many minutes you're playing, what the intensity of your overall training outside of competition is like, but at least at maintenance. You really do not want to go into that game with your gas tank half empty. And on top of that, like I said, you want to make sure you're fueling with the right type of fuel. So make sure you're getting plenty of carbohydrates, decent amount of fat, but you don't want to go crazy high fat like keto. Again, I have a video on that on the channel as well. And then protein, pretty standard, 1 gram per pound, nothing too crazy. Like your day should look pretty normal from a nutrition standpoint, but you really need to have that dialed in. And then whatever you have for your pregame meal and your meals leading up to game time, you're gonna wanna make sure it's something that makes you feel good. Because if you go into the game with a queasy stomach and you're just not feeling good and you're uncomfortable, odds are earlier in the game you're not going to perform well, and especially later in the game when you have the added fatigue on top of that and the stress, you're not going to perform well either. So make sure that pregame meal is something that makes you feel good, fueled, not full. You can watch that video on the channel if you want to learn more about like exactly how to build that out, but those things are super important. Secondly, you're also going to want to pay attention to hydration. Hydration. I feel like I talk about this so much on the channel. I repeat myself over and over again, but for a good reason. Like I always say, it's one of the most underrated yet most important aspects of sports nutrition. So many hoopers do not drink enough water. They either forget, they don't like water. That one just is mind-boggling to me. Like, how do you not like water? But nonetheless, hoopers are not drinking enough water. And if you go into a game dehydrated, even as little as 2% loss in body water, you're gonna experience really negative effects on your performance. So if you can avoid that situation, you can put yourself in a much better situation in which you will be performing better physically and mentally, because dehydration has both physical and mental negative effects if you are in fact dehydrated. Like I said earlier, you need to perform physically in terms of just having the strength and the endurance to last later in games, but you also need to perform mentally. You need to have the mental sharpness. If you have a mental lapse, you forget your man on defense, or you forget the play on offense and it breaks down, that could quite literally cost you a game and erase any chance of you being your team's go-to player in those late game situations. You might even end up on the bench. So we definitely want to avoid that, and the easiest way to make that happen is by staying hydrated. Do not go into your game dehydrated. And this third thing we're going to discuss today is something that's kind of, I don't want to say underrated, but just overlooked. It's not like a massive game changer sort of thing, but it can give you a nice little edge if you use it correctly. But it can also hurt you really badly in terms of your performance if you use it incorrectly, and that's caffeine. Caffeine is an ergogenic aid. It enhances your performance. But the thing here is people react to caffeine differently. Some people react really well, and it does in fact enhance their performance. Some people don't react to it well, and it leaves them feeling jittery, anxious, and that's the last thing you want going into a basketball game, especially if you're trying to be clutch. You can't be thinking like that. You can't be anxious or jittery. That's not going to be a good look for you. So you got to really understand how your body responds to caffeine, and I would 100% recommend testing out different doses of caffeine during the off season or during your workouts, not on game day. So do not try this for the first time on game day. Test it out beforehand, but it can be something that potentially works for you. If you're someone who tends to be a little bit more mellow and cool and has trouble kind of amping yourself up for the game, caffeine would probably work pretty well for you. If you're someone who's already wired and anxious and nervous before the game even starts, probably stay away from it. Again, you can test it if you want in workouts and maybe low pressure situations, but definitely don't try it on game day, and I'd be a little bit cautious about that. Also, if you're gonna go the caffeine route, be mindful of any other ingredients. So if you take a pre-workout, that might be other ingredients in there that you don't really want to be taking before a game. For example, beta-alanine in certain doses could cause that sort of tingly feeling in your fingertips, and you probably don't really want that going into a game. So just be mindful of that stuff. But overall, caffeine can be a helpful tool if you react well to it. So like we discussed earlier in the video, nutrition plays a massive role in increasing overall stamina in your games, in your workouts, and things like that. It's really important as a basketball player. So I actually have a whole video on the channel diving a bit more in depth in that specific topic of how to fuel properly for increased stamina as a basketball player. So I'll toss it on the screen right now. Go ahead and check it out. And as always, drop a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Comment down below what your biggest takeaway was, and I will see you in the next video.